Why did the Queen of Sheba come to Solomon, and what was her appraisal of him? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Kings on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
Today we're going to be discussing 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 1 to 13. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Kings chapter 10, beginning at verse 1. Now when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels that bore spices, very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she spoke with him about all that was in her heart. So Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain it to her. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. Then she said to the king, "It was a true report which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes, and indeed the half was not told to me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard. Happy are your men, and happy are these your servants, who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord has loved Israel forever, therefore he made you king, to do justice and righteousness." Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices in great quantity, and precious stones. There never again came such abundance of spices as the Queen of Sheba gave to Solomon. Also the ships of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought great quantities of almug wood and precious stones from Ophir. And the king made steps of the almug wood for the house of the Lord, and for the king's house, also harps and stringed instruments for singers. There never again came such almug wood, nor has the like been seen to this day. Now King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired, whatever she asked, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal generosity. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. Here in chapter 10, we get one of the famous stories from the time of King Solomon, the visit of the Queen of Sheba. We do not exactly know when this story takes place, but from her viewing of the buildings that he built in Jerusalem, it must have been after those were built, meaning that at a minimum we are 25 years into Solomon's reign. That Solomon is still worshiping the Lord and still enjoying the wealth that God blessed him with also shows us that we're likely closer to the 25-year mark of his reign than we are to the 30 or 35-year mark. A lot of ink has been spilled trying to come up with where exactly Sheba is, as we aren't exactly certain. Jesus refers to this woman as the Queen of the South in Matthew 12, verse 42, but all that does is tell us that she comes from a place south of Israel. There are some who place Sheba in East Africa, maybe near Ethiopia, while others place it in southern Arabia, perhaps near Yemen. From what the Queen of Sheba brings to Solomon, it seems to make more sense that she is from southern Arabia, but since the Bible doesn't say, and we can't prove it via some archaeological find, we shouldn't be dogmatic of it. What we are certain of is that this queen came from afar because she had heard of the fame of Solomon concerning his wisdom. Now the question is, how might she have heard, especially if she was from farther away? After all, she didn't have internet, television, or even the mail system we have today. Let's recall from the end of chapter 9 that Solomon had developed a fleet that went sailing to different places, gathering riches in trade. When these ships came to port, the seamen would tell people where they were from and what life was like back in their country in order to create relationships suitable for trading. And once these relationships were established, word of mouth could get going and spread the information further. Solomon's fame, his wisdom, his wealth and power came to the ears of the Queen of Sheba, and so she decided that she had to see it for herself. Thus she came to Jerusalem with quite an entourage, along with camels bearing spices, gold, and precious stones to give to Solomon as a show of her generosity. But the reason for her visit was not just to see the wealth of Solomon, but the wisdom of Solomon. So she posed him some difficult questions that only someone truly wise could answer. Now we don't know what these questions were, but needless to say, Solomon passed the test. There was nothing too difficult for Solomon to be able to explain to her. And then, of course, add to that all of the great buildings in Jerusalem that Solomon had built and the wealth that he possessed, and she came to the conclusion the Lord must be with him. And of course, all of those things did happen because of the Lord's blessings. But when judging for ourselves today, we must remember that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. Just because someone is rich or powerful or famous does not necessarily mean that the Lord is with them. Now, the Lord might be, for he does bless people, but it doesn't necessarily make it so. When it came to Solomon's wisdom, the Queen of Sheba came to the only conclusion she could. It had to be from God, leading her to conclude that the rest was from God too. May we have the same type of discernment on our part as well. The queen tells Solomon that she had heard of his wisdom from afar, but even then, until she came to see it personally, she didn't believe it. But now, having seen it, she exclaims that in reality, what had been told to her wasn't even half of it. That's how far and beyond the wisdom of Solomon was. So it was that the Queen of Sheba exchanged lavish gifts with Solomon, as royalty so often does, and she departed for home. As we said earlier, though, her presence here is mentioned by Jesus as a judgment against the people of his day, for this queen traveled from the ends of the earth a great distance to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, when Jesus was there, a wiser man than Solomon was present with them. And the people wouldn't even travel a short distance to hear him, the him being Jesus. Such a sad statement, but true, and it is even true today. In the next lesson, we're going to examine the wealth of Solomon during his reign, before having to come to chapter 11 and study about Solomon's downfall. So we hope you'll return for that. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 14 to 29, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.